This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests of this program and are not necessarily those of station staff, management, or sponsors. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. It's time to Ask a Rabbi. Call in with your questions and comments at 340-1590. And now, here's your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
And hello there, this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Ask a Rabbi, and this post-election Friday. And I thought it would be kind of appropriate to talk a little bit about the role of women in scriptures, something we don't hear a whole lot about. A lot of people like to think that there is no role for women in Scripture, but that's far from true. So I picked two little pieces that I think are worth noting. The first one is the end of Genesis 24. This is the story of Eliezer goes to find a wife for Isaac, brings back Rebekah, and points him out to her, and she takes her veil and covers herself. And then the servant reports to Isaac everything he did, and it starts in verse 67. Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as a wife. Isaac loved her, and thus found comfort after his mother's death. Now, that might not sound like anything really significant, but moving her into Sarah's tent is huge. That means she's in charge of the household. Right? Sarah was the matriarch. When Sarah told Abraham, divorce Hagar, even though he didn't want to, God said, you will do what Sarah says. And so he does. Right? That's a little earlier in the text. I did not look up that reference, even though I'm talking about it here. Right? But God specifically tells Abraham, she's in charge. She's in charge of the household. And another example of what do women do is in chapter 31, okay, this is the end. Jacob has worked 20 years for Laban, and chapter 31 starts out, he heard these things that Laban's son were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from that which was our father's he has built up all his wealth. Jacob also saw that Laban's manner toward him was not as it had been in the past. Imagine that sense of feeling. Then God says to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers where you were born, and I will be with you. And at that point you would think that all he would need to do is go and pack, but that's not what he does. Jacob had Rachel and Leah called to the field where his flock was. Now, why would he call to Rachel and Leah to the field? First of all, because tents have ears. Right. So he's got to get them out from where the servants are going to report back to Laban what he's saying. But when he sees them, he says, look, your father's manner toward me has changed. It's not what it was in the past. And God of my father has been with me, and I've been faithful to your father, but your father's cheated me. He's changed my wages over and over again. So he's building an argument. This is not somebody who can tell his wives, we're leaving. Instead, what he's really doing is he's asking, right? And so he said, he then goes through all the examples of where the wages changed and what have you. And then he says, and I saw this dream. I saw about the goats and this. And, it's kind of like Tevye with the dream to convince Goldie that the choice of husband is not right for the child. So even that was not new. Right? The playwright used this concept. Jacob's using a dream, right? The angel of God came to me and said, Jacob, do this and do that. And that's why I did it. And, I'm after all the God of where you were and where you made a vow to me. So you need to go back. Right? This is the argument that Jacob is making to Rachel and Leah. And they ponder it. Right? In verse 14, Rachel and Leah answered him saying, are we really going to get an inheritance in our father's house? It doesn't look like it, because now he views us as outsiders. He views us as your wives. So our status has changed within the family. And he's used up the dowry and everything else. So everything that you've done, it's okay. It's what God wants. And, then they start to pack up. It takes them 3 days to pack. And I can imagine if he didn't have the women agreeing with him, it would take probably a whole lot longer to pack than 3 days. But the women are in charge of packing up the household. They're the ones, because he stays out with the sheep. He never does come back into the camp. They go back, pack up the camp, and meet him and head out. So you see there that the women have quite a big role. And again, other examples of that, not necessarily good ones, or not where good things are happening, but where Rebecca tells Jacob to dress up like his brother Esau. She's the one telling him. And he doesn't ever say, "No, Mom, that's not right." Right? He just says, Dad's going to figure it out, and Dad's going to get mad at me. Well, that's his argument, which is a rather flimsy one. So, all right, so you can see there that the text doesn't have to explain that, because that's the way it was. There was a division of authority, and it took both men and women to run a household then, and it does now. I don't know very many households that could run effectively with, obviously you run a household single parent, but it's tough.
It is very, very, very tough.
Right. It's to my sidekick here, Stuart. Being a single parent, very, very tough. And I can tell you in my household, we've got animals and, we've got the two of us. We don't have any kids in our house, but it's still, there's a division of labor. There's things that I do and then things that he does. Mm-hmm. And together we can keep the household running. And yes, it's much harder, a single parent.
Speaking of Fiddler on the Roof, you want to play Matchmaker?
There you go. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I was thinking at my house, I'll mow the grass. Yeah, I'll mow the grass. I don't like to.
Yeah.
But I'll do it. But if I had to shutter up the house for a hurricane, I'm in trouble. I couldn't do that myself. So, yeah.
I think I could.
I mean, there's a lot of other things that I need my hubby for, but there's no way I can shutter the house myself.
Well, and when we shutter for it, it's the two of us out there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I wouldn't even know where to begin. That's why I call somebody.
And that's the other choice, right? You have to hire people to do things if you're a single parent. Single
or
parents
if you're
are
not
often
mechanically inclined.
Yeah, but sometimes you can't afford to do that.
Right.
That's true.
And then you become a burden on your neighbors.
Yeah. So, and that's part of why we say it takes a community to raise a child, because people do need to step in. And so there are clearly roles for people to do, and people work together, and those lines are not always hard and fast. They blend and they shift depending according to the skills of the individuals assigned. Mm-hmm. But the idea that women had no role in scriptures flies in the face of those kinds of discussions. Do we hear a lot about it? No, because it is mostly the men's story. But the women are clearly there, and clearly the men have to interact with them, and permissions need to be given, etc.
Well, of course they were there. The rest of us wouldn't be here today if they weren't there. You have to say, well, it was the perspective of the person who wrote the
story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a good point, right? Because the story is always written from a perspective, and
So are you saying the concept of the woman is always right started way back then?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Even God says it to
happy
Abraham.
Life, happy wife, happy
yeah.
happy life.
Happy wife, happy life.
I didn't learn that.
When mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? And it's interesting, right? That's something across cultures, because one of the things that I do with my class at IRSC is I show a video of a Parsi wedding, of a Zoroastrian wedding. And there's one line in there that's we always chuckle over in the class. But the father of the groom is saying to him, you've got a beautiful wife here. It's going to be wonderful. And I want to give you something that's really, really important. Yes, dear. Right? And everybody in the classroom, of course, chuckles. Because that is across cultures. You need to know which battles are worth fighting and which ones aren't. And
well, I will tell you without naming any names, because I don't want anybody in trouble. I do know somebody who I used to always chuckle because I'd always hear, yes, dear. Yes, dear. Yes, dear. And I'm thinking to myself, he can't really mean it all those times. And what's going to happen when he explodes?
Yeah.
Now, I don't know the answer to that because I've never heard of him exploding. But the marriage has been remarkably successful for many, many decades.
Because his dear knows that he doesn't really mean it all the time.
Maybe, but it's yes, dear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be honest, I can't do that, but I guess it's a remarkable
but see,
talent.
For your career and in your life, you argue a point. That's your position. That's who you're cut out to be.
Let's just say, without this person had a role in getting certain things like way up there in the atmosphere. So I think that he probably had a perspective as well, but was a more type B personality, I guess, except when you had to be. And it was just, I heard it when I'd go and I'd spend a week or 2 weeks over and over. Yes, dear, yes, dear, yes, dear, yes, dear. I mean, I don't know what happened later on, whether they ever discussed any of those issues, but all I heard was yes, dear.
Yeah.
And they seemed happy.
You know,
and they are happy.
You know, it's a function of knowing. You know, okay, so some things in a couple are check-ins. It's not always do this, do that. Sometimes it can be, hey, I'm going to go shopping on Tuesday. You know, that's a, yes, dear is fine. I acknowledge, you're going to go shopping on Tuesday. That's not a permission thing. That's just an informational. And so in those cases, the yes, dear is not yielding or permission giving or any of those. It's just, yeah, okay, got it.
Or like, take out the trash.
Yes, dear.
Could you, would you?
Yeah.
Yes, dear.
And
I get yes, Dad.
So now I'm going to take it a little bit personal. I had a procedure done on Tuesday. Thank you to a wonderful doctor at Martin North and all of the staff, amazing staff. I was blown away by the pre-op crew. Did a beautiful job. And I'm amazed at the difference in technology from when I'd had surgery in Tucson, about 8 years ago, and I can really see the differences in what's changed and what's technology. Now, some of that I'm sure is just differences of hospitals, and some of it is advances in technology.
Or the market, where bigger hospitals versus smaller hospitals.
Well, they're at Martin North, probably not all that different from the hospital where I had the surgery done, and both actually slightly older buildings that have been around a while. And I'm pleased with both sets of doctors, and very different tone from the stance that I went in. That was a funny day in Tucson because the Federation had a meeting at noon, and I went to the meeting at noon. It was normally a lunch meeting, and of course you're on fasting, so I didn't eat. But I attended the meeting, and then I went home, and Bill drove me to the hospital. And I was supposed to be at the hospital, I think, 3 o'clock or something. The meeting was over at 2. I came home, and everybody's like, I can't believe you're here with the hospital. And it's like, well, what am I going to do? Sit home and twiddle my thumbs? I might as well come to the meeting. I won't be incapacitated for another hour. It's not like I've got tons of things to do. I'm ready. And so I was just, all I needed to do was cart myself over to the hospital. And I did that, but because it was an afternoon surgery, there wasn't anybody else there. It was me and the OR staff and being prepped and into surgery. And sometime late that night, I got into my room, and I don't really remember much of it.
Right.
Whereas this was be here at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was the total difference of 20 people. Maybe an exaggeration, it may not be. There was this huge number of people in little tiny stalls being prepped. And, just I could hear the conversation. I could hear, when was the last time you had a drink? When was all
Right.
the same questions being asked up and down the line. Move this, do this, wipe that, and all these instructions. So that was very different. But the caliber of the people caring was not, and that was wonderful. So some really good folks. So a shout out to everybody at Martin North. Thank you for the care that I got. But so the other side to that. Right, is that for a day or so, I'm not supposed to have driven. Right, so I didn't. I taught my classes at IRSC on Wednesday, and but I didn't drive myself there. So Bill was quite the angel, and I made a point of thanking him. right? Because even though, yes, we had talked about it and we planned it,
and he knew he was going to have to do that.
He knew he was going to have to do that because it wasn't safe to just say, here's the keys, have fun. At least not until I had done a little bit of close-in driving. That's what the doctor had said. He said, drive close to home so that you can make it home. And then, then you can go back to driving. So, yes, I'm driving now. But for Wednesday, the poor guy got to drag me to the campus in St. Lucie West, and I taught my class there. He sat and read nicely in the lobby on his little Kindle. And, we went home. We went up to Vero because my afternoon class was in Vero. And he tried to sit out on the trees, and the ants came and had a discussion with him. So he moved back inside to one of the chairs. And then we came home. And then, then I had a meeting in the evening, and I actually drove myself to the meeting. So, and he had a meeting too, so it worked out well because he would have had to miserably cancel the meeting if he had driven me, or actually what would have happened is I would have stayed home. And so that was my short drive test because it wasn't a very far distance to the meeting. And, I appreciated that he changed his routine. And yes, some of that's done out of love. Some of that's probably out of marital sense of obligation or duty. I don't know what portions are which, and it doesn't really matter. It matters that he did it, and I think it also matters that I appreciate it.
I think you expect that your partner's going to do it.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's that partnership.
And if they don't, it's disappointing.
The partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd like to believe, hopefully you do the same, but I think in any partnership, whether it's a marriage or, a committed relationship, that's an expectation.
Yeah.
And if it fails, that's a problem.
Yeah, it hurts. It definitely hurts. But even if you expect it, that doesn't mean you should take it for granted.
Absolutely not.
Right. So it is still an imposition. It is a change in his schedule. It means bending whatever he wanted to do for the day to what I had to do. Whereas normally he's used to having, completely free time while I'm teaching. He can do whatever he wants because I'm not around. And yes, there's a reason why we've managed to be married for a few years, 38 and a half years. I guess we'll stick it out for a while.
You got married when you were 5?
Yeah. like Rebecca, 3, right? Child bride. I keep telling him that he robbed the cradle. And, yeah, it's amazing. I look back at that and it's like, it's really particularly amazing because we had met in March and got married in August. So it wasn't like we dated for a long period of time. It wasn't a long engagement.
Did your family say it'll never work because you just met?
My mother of blessed memory did not say that. My father had already passed. His father had already passed. Our fathers died when both of us were reasonably young.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember his mother objecting. If she did, she had the good sense to keep her mouth shut or just say it to him. She never said it in front of me. My brother, on the other hand, one of my brothers, not nice. I'm crazy. You need to go have your head, or he's crazy. Go have your head examined. There's nobody would want my sister. So thank you. I love you too. That's one of the charming things between that brother and Bill. They still don't have a good relationship owing to part of that relationship. So, what can I say? And but clearly we did stick it out. And no, I don't think my mother was surprised because she watched me fall in love. She wasn't the least bit surprised. And I'd like to think that I was reasonably level-headed as much as anyone is in those moments.
I will tell you 2 things.
Okay.
First, on the concept of this getting along, staying married, one thing is remarkable. I've been on a dozen cruises.
Yeah.
And they always have that newlywed or not so newlywed game.
Right.
And they're always asking, before you get the contestants, the oldest married couple in the room.
Oi.
And usually you have a couple that's been married, 60 years or whatever. They're 85. And every cruise director, they're trained, I'm sure. They ask the same question. So, and they ask it of the guy. Tell me, how have you managed to stay married that long? For all these honeymooners that are on this cruise and all the younger people, how have you managed to stay married that long? And every single guy, every single old 70, 80-year-old guy has the same answer. I do what she says.
Yes, dear. Goes
She's
back
the
to
boss.
the yes, dear.
I mean, it's the universal answer. And I'll be honest, I don't understand that because I could never just do it that way. Maybe that's why, maybe that's what works, but I hear that over and over and over and over again.
Well, they need to talk to Bill because he doesn't just do what I say. But we have been married for a good long time.
And the second thing I was going to say is that lovely South Florida Facebook singles group that you introduced me to. If I've learned one thing on that group, where all these women are way further south, they don't exist on the Treasure Coast. But if I've learned one
They're moving
thing,
this way.
I've learned one thing. Almost everybody, is seeking the same thing. I mean, they're seeking these qualities and their expectations.
Are they looking for a unicorn?
Not, there's been some discussions about that. Maybe some are. But I think generally people seem to be looking for somebody who will be there for them when, especially when you're dating older now. That you're more mature and you understand life a little bit. Somebody that will be there for them when you need them. Because if you're the right kind of person, whether you're male or female, you're thinking, because I know I'll be there for you. And that's just a massive thing everybody seems to be looking for. And then, of course, you add in all the similar pains that people have probably gone through in earlier relationships, and you find the same qualities that people are looking for. And it's not surprising what they are. What's surprising is how difficult it is to find it. And then when you do find it, you find that there are some men and some women who, you're like, look, the unicorn. Certain boxes aren't checked. They got all these other things. But without those other few things, they're not interested or, And it's just...
So when you're young and stupid and you fall in love, it's easier that way than when you have all this.
It's not always an Adam and Eve story.
Yeah, but you have experience, and maybe the experience gets in the way.
And sometimes the experience helps. I mean, we're not going to turn this into a dating show.
I was going to say this would be a good show for like Valentine's Day.
But sometimes the experience helps because it gives you perspective, and if you use the perspective wisely, then your expectations are changed, and they're not as unrealistic.
So I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to remind people that you can call in with a question at 772-340-1590 to ask a rabbi. And the other thing I'm going to flip in and say that also clearly divorce is not new. Hagar gets divorced. And there's already a known, recognized procedure used in Torah. So for relationships to not work is not new. It's been there since the beginning. Adam and Eve work. There's not are there choices or are there not? Because clearly Cain is able to find somebody. And who does that come from? That's a whole nother discussion. Right? Who are the other people that are around besides Adam and Eve? And who does what after Noah, which is really another version of a couple. We all come from Noah. So small families, but even so, there are divorces, there are intrigues, there's all that. None of that has changed in thousands and thousands of years of human development. We still have the same basic human dynamic relationship questions, and we still have the same basic questions about whether or not we can get along with each other. And so now I'm going to pull the rabbi card on you and say some of this stuff helps taking a step back, pausing, and pondering. What's the bigger scheme of things? What's the big picture here, right? Are the little check boxes critical, or are they not critical? Right? What's what is perfection? Because we're all perfectly human. As one of my members in Tucson always liked to remind people, when you're looking for a partner, you've only got humans to pick from. Right? None of us are saints, and so we've all got our good points and our bad points. As I know that I've not been a whole lot of fun recovering from the surgery. Largely, what Bill's been seeing is this body in the bed when he's not driving it around, and I'm not nearly as functional as I normally am. So with that, I'm going to invite people to please give a call, 772-340-1590, and let's hear a little bit about our congregation. Congregation Eitz Chayim, your welcoming, inclusive, spiritual, and joyful Jewish home in Port St. Lucie. We welcome you to renew your inner Jew and join us. We are Reform Jewish with a renewal flair. We are multi-generational. We are welcoming to all. Come join us for a Friday night at 7:30 p.m. for our Kabbalat Shabbat services, or Stolen Moments on Saturday morning, where we discuss the Parsha of the week at 9:30 a.m. Shabbat morning services follow Stolen Moments, usually at around 10:30 a.m. Our address is 540 Northwest University, across from Met Stadium, and we are in Suite 102. Again, that's 540 Northwest University, Suite 102. Please join us for Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. or Shabbat morning starting at 9:30 a.m. for Stolen Moments. Congregation Eitz Chayim.
Now back to Ask a Rabbi here on WPSL, and back to your host, Rabbi Shafir Lobb.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb at Ask a Rabbi, 772-340-1590. And it's as good a point as any to say something about Taste of Judaism. Thank you, Jim. We have our Taste of Judaism session, which is the second of 3. It's a free, open to everyone. Please come and check out. We'll be talking about values. That's this Wednesday at 7:30. At the Temple, 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. It's the blue office buildings, all kind of across from First Data Field, Met Stadium. It's those blue office buildings, West Park. We're right next to the elevator in the front, Suite 102. Now, the other time for those classes is Sunday at 1:30. It's the same class whether you come Wednesday or Sunday. It's a 2-hour class, a little bit about Judaism, particularly in the realm of values, kind of an ethics thing, and looking at what are Jewish ethics. So those are really good topics. And then the next class, the third and last Taste of Judaism session, will be, in 2 weeks, and that's the, the 28th. The 28th, and whatever that Sunday is after that. That'll also be a Wednesday and a Sunday, and that the topic there will be community. We did do the first one, which was on spirituality. So we talked a lot about God and what is Jewish spirituality all about. This time we'll be talking about ethics and values. So please do join us, no charge. We do ask that you register, which you can do on Facebook quite easily. Go to our Facebook page and register for it. That way we're sure to have a handout for you, and we also do actually have a real physical taste, so we want to have the right amount of food for people who are coming. You can come and have a schmear.
And this is not just for Jews.
No, it's definitely not just for Jews. It's for anybody with any kind of curiosity about Judaism. It's not. You don't need any Hebrew. You don't need any prior knowledge. It truly is an entry, a taste,
And nobody's trying to convert anybody.
Nobody's trying to convert anybody. That's not our style. And it's just come and be informed and see what it's about. If you've had any curiosity, if you want to see why Judaism is more than just a bagel, as they put it. What is it about? How is it?
Chinese food on Christmas.
And Chinese food on Christmas.
They're the only ones open.
That is exactly why Chinese food is popular for Christmas, because they are open.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't sell. If they're Hindu or Buddhist or Taoist, they don't worry about Christmas, so they're open. and that makes for some delicious food. And I think about, so here's a plug for Bernstein on Essex Street, kosher Chinese food in New York. Right. Bernstein means amber, and it says that on their chopsticks. Bernstein is amber, so here's amber in Chinese. And any kind of style of food can be kosher or not kosher. It's just a function of how you make and what you make. So, are there any questions out there for Ask a Rabbi today at 772-340-1590? And we'll come back to some more talk. We talked a little bit about women in scriptures, so let's pick another light topic like immigration.
Oh, you're really trying to get the calls, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. I'd like to get some calls. And right, so coming out of Egypt, right? What's the claim, right? Are they immigrants coming back to Canaan, or were they immigrants in Egypt and leaving? Right, because the text is they were sojourners there, but they were undocumented workers. Is really what that relationship was of the. It's not the American model of the African slave in America. It's a different kind of model, and not that either one of those is good, because they're not. But every society seems to need to oppress somebody in order to get somebody to do the jobs that people don't want to do, instead of paying people to do those jobs that are miserable. It's like we want to be able to get by and get the miserable jobs done on the cheap, and then we want to treat the people who do them poorly.
Well, we do that right here. I mean, not that we're the only ones, but we do that with the migrant farm workers.
Exactly. That's the whole reason for the immigrant status issue, is so that we have an undocumented worker that can be forced to work at jobs that are not fun and cheaply.
I will say, as the Ask a Lawyer component, I have gotten probably half a dozen calls from either undocumented workers or friends or family who speak better English about, wasn't paid the wages I was promised, or didn't get overtime. Is there anything I can do? And usually the response goes the same way. Yes, you have a claim. You have a claim for this, or you have a claim for that, but if you pursue it, you may get reported by the court.
Yeah.
And you may get sent back.
Yeah.
And so what does that do? They don't pursue it.
There's a line in a Tom Lehrer song that comes to mind. The line that he has is, even the pharaohs hit Hebrew braceros. Right. So it gives you, that's a recognized piece. India has the untouchables, right, which is that's a way of taking a part of your population and forcing them down so that the only jobs they can get are the untouchable jobs. Right. And so you make it so that they can't move up, that they don't have mobility. There's a variety of different ways that cultures do it, and quite candidly, I don't like any of them. I'd like to think that we've got a robust enough economy that we can pay people what a job is really worth doing.
But in a sense, our culture does it too, and not just with migrant workers.
That's right.
I know when I was growing up, neither of my parents had gone to college, and it was a very important thing to them that I go to college. And that was because, especially back then, you could not get a career without a college education. You could get a job, but you couldn't get a career. And that was the barrier, being able to get into college, or go to college, afford college. And it was one of the artificial barriers, I think, of our society to people being able to move up the ladder.
Except that at the same time, I think of folks like the tire builders at Goodyear, back when tire building was much more manual than it is today. Today it's very automated. Automated has taken away a lot of the high-paying factory jobs. It's not immigrants. It's not work going overseas. It's automation. It's that it no longer takes 20 people to feed the line to build the tire.
That and those machines don't have to be covered by workers' compensation and all that good stuff.
They may cost a bundle
benefits.
to put the machinery in, but once they're in, there's no big deal. I watched Hershey automate, right, back in '03 when I was a child, when the dinosaurs roamed. When I was young, when you went to Hershey, you actually went through the factory, and you saw the workers, setting up the line, and even though that was still highly automated and had big pieces of equipment, there were people who had to monitor and babysit and take care of that equipment. And now, you don't need anywhere near the number of people, and that's why they don't take you on a tour through the factory, because it's not as interesting to watch a bunch of machines pump out pieces of chocolate.
And people will actually realize there are no people here.
Yeah.
And so now Lucie and Ethel can't get that job.
Right, yeah. They really can't.
And we're missing out on that comedy as well.
Yeah.
That's right.
So they can't sit there and stuff chocolate in their mouths. Right, because that job isn't there anymore.
That's a job. I want it.
If that's a real thing, you want to do it.
Well, unfortunately, that one's gone. And I think that's the piece, right? And that's nobody's fault. That's just reality. That's what it is. But that has caused a lot of people, that took away a good chunk of what I would call upper middle class income, which was the working people making a good wage because they were on factory, they were on overtime. And
well, it's across the board. I mean, it started with the phone company.
Well, it's everywhere.
Well, it's also, and then the quote unquote retraining was never really retraining. I mean, if it was really retraining, you would have been retraining people to do all these technical things that technology now requires, and overseas where they have a lot more education hours and focus on things like science and math. They're the ones getting the jobs.
I mean, I remember being little, and one of our neighbors, the wife worked at Sears. And I remember my grandmother going, "Oh, she's got a good job. She works for Sears because she's going to have all these benefits and different things." Well, Sears is gone, too.
Sears is going. I mean, right, it's leaving the Treasure Coast now.
I mean,
so, yeah.
As a company, we're
going to see less and less of the retail store as more and more online purchase occurs. And again, that's an automated thing. Talking about automation, though, I was in Hawaii, and the Giancana machine is the machine that takes a pineapple and gets the core out of it. And why did they do that? Because that's a miserable, sticky job that nobody wanted to do. And so this one engineer came up with, 13 or 14 different machines, and the job of the worker was to size the pineapple and put them down the right chute. And then it came down and it sliced, and people selected the slices. And now that's all automated, right? And now that it's one machine and it comes and goes because it's a smarter machine. So it knows how to accommodate a different size pineapple. But we all started out, automation has been coming in and coming in and coming in. The writing's been on the wall. And when I worked at the tech center at Goodyear, the only reason that tech center still survived was as a prototype, because there was no good way to automate the building, the multi-story factory that was in. Because factories, to be efficient, are one level, so people are not waiting on an elevator, right? Because elevators are the worst time consumer. And they're wonderful things for moving stuff up and down. But if you look at the modern tire factory, it's low level, one level. Stuff comes in one end, works its way through the factory, and the finished goods go out the other end. And stuff's not going back and forth. The process engineers have really streamlined the process, and automation has done a lot for it. It's a lot safer, too. I can remember one time in the tire factory actually grabbing somebody as the tread machine was coming in to put the tread on, and if he had stayed where he was, the safety had failed, and it was going to come in and grab him. And, so it is a lot safer. We don't hear about as many people being killed in the factories, that sort of thing, because of malfunctions of machinery. But for a long time, it's been people tending machines. The machines have just gotten better and smarter and more computer controlled. And so one person can sit, I sit here in our studio and I see, there's 4 or 5 images of me aside from the
Facebook.
besides the Facebook Live, there's the YouTube feed and the other studio recordings that are going on. And somebody can scan those and process them and look at different things and keep tabs of more things than you could before we had the kinds of televising and that sort of thing, and then the ways of supervising. So our lives have changed, and no, we can't live the same life as in the Bible, but we can lead the same kind of meaningful life, because the thing that hasn't changed, that has not changed, is that people still are human. We still need to treat each other with respect. We still need to be in community. We still need to do all those kinds of things. So, that's the plug, if you will, for Taste of Judaism. How do those values that we take out of this ancient text that we know has been the same for at least 2,000, 2,500 years because of the carbon dating of the Dead Sea Scrolls? It's clearly, if the text hasn't changed in those 2,500 years, then it's been pretty steady. So what things are still of value in these texts? Somebody wrote on our page, these are all stories, and they're absolutely right. They're all stories. They're sacred story. That's exactly what they are. But what they embody are values and traditions and relationships and guidelines for us on how to live our lives. And they're not technologically dependent. So, it does talk about things like immigrants and oppression and how you treat people. What's the minimum? What's the minimum you do for a slave? We might say, well, we don't have slaves today. Oh, yeah, we do. We have people who have to do a certain kind of work because they can barely survive. Can they leave that? Kind of, maybe, sort of, but maybe not. Not many people are willing to risk homelessness in order to change jobs. And if you're really in a tight squeeze job, then you've kind of got to find the new one before you leave the old one.
That's how I left Chicago, homeless.
Well,
we moved here to Florida and we lived in a van.
Yeah.
In Jupiter.
and sometimes it takes that kind of position, right? So some of the details have changed, but the values in the stories have not. Right? And so there are minimum rules in here, like pay somebody their wages on time. Don't not pay them. Wow. What a concept.
Mm-hmm. And yet it still happens.
Oh, it happens.
I get the calls all the time. I get the calls all the time.
Yeah. And so, in the part that scares me is when somebody says to me, oh, I really follow the Bible. And I'm like, yeah? What parts? Does that mean that you pay your bills? Does that mean that you honor people? Does it mean you respect people? And I wish it did. Unfortunately, that's not usually what I find that it means. And that's true across all religions again. Right? If somebody has to tell me that they follow scriptures, it usually means I won't be able to figure it out from their behavior.
Frankly, that's why whenever, typically in the Deep South, you had people quoting from the Bible, my ears turned off immediately because it did not sound like somebody who was educated explaining something. It sounded like somebody who has found something parroting it.
Yeah. Well, all too often people do what is called cherry picking, which is you pick a line that you like, that says something you like, and you ignore the verses in front of it and behind it. And Judaism says you can't do that. You can't do that. You've got to take it in context, right? So in one context, for example, in Isaiah, right, you shall take the sword and beat it into plowshares. But in Joel, it says take the plowshare and beat them into swords. Right? So context is all the difference. I can find any position that I want, and I can cherry pick verses, especially if I edit the verse just very, 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 very slightly. I can justify just about anything I want to in the text.
Yeah, that would be a good exercise.
What?
Whether for your students or even within the congregation, to take a section and go cherry pick some stuff and make an argument that is absolutely absurd, but is supported from
theoretically by text. Yeah, it's not really, but it appears to be supported. That is a fun exercise. That would be a good one for the confirmation class to do. That would be an excellent one for a confirmation class, to see the text. I did a version of that in my ethics class at IRSC when I taught ethics a couple semesters back. I had the students take pro and con positions on different issues. We selected some issues as a class, and then they picked out which ethics system they wanted to use, and they had to argue pro or con depending on what they picked out. And what the class discovered was that you could argue pro or con just about anything you wanted to from any philosophical system, depending on how you maneuvered it. The only one that it was difficult is that Kant absolutely rejected capital punishment. And so if you're going to be pro capital punishment, it's kind of hard to be Kantian. But outside of that, you could get there through the utilitarian system. You could get anti, depending on what arguments you pull out. And isn't that, in essence, what is really going on in our society, which is that people do cherry pick the issues, they cherry pick the support, and they bend everything to support the position that somebody wants.
And that's the problem, but there's also a virtue to that kind of an exercise if done the right way with the people who are doing it. And for example, when I first started a couple months ago with some of the students at Lincoln Park Academy, as speech and debate coach for their first year, being a team again in the 21st century, and a little plug, they have their first tournament tomorrow morning. And
Wow.
we're all a little bit nervous, but going to throw some people into competition and hope they enjoy it. But anyway, my point is, I had them take a position on a big topic. I don't even remember which one it was that was going on in the news. I'm sure it had to do with politics or the election. And I just raise your hands, who's pro this, who's con that. I said, okay, now we're going to do a debate. All of you who raise pro, you're con. All of those who raise con, you're pro. Go take 15 minutes to the computers in the back of the classroom, go do some research, and come back with the best arguments you can for the position you don't like. Now, some of them, didn't really do a very good job at it. Probably their heart wasn't in it. Some of them came back and interesting debates. Yeah. And of course, at the very end, I'm sure you can guess what my message was. It wasn't the message was you can argue anything, go hire a lawyer. That's what we're trained to do. The message was that you can learn about the other position and either come to understand where it's coming from, which could strengthen your own position, or learn where it's coming from so that you can have an intelligent discussion and maybe modify somebody else's views from a 10 to a 9. Not going to change them all. But arguing the con position is a very favorite thing in debate in high schools and colleges throughout the country, putting people in the opposite position of what they believe. And in most debate tournaments, you have 4 rounds of pro and 4 rounds of con, and you just switch back and forth.
Yeah.
But it's an amazing skill. It's an incredible skill to learn, not just to be able to do it, but for the understanding it gives you that every position an argument can be made if you really try.
Mm-hmm. Most
and
places.
you just have to understand that every argument, every position has some kernels there that are legitimate. The question is the whole argument legitimate, or does it fall apart when you look at it more closely?
So I'd also go with that part of that, the importance of that exercise is being able to step onto the other side of the table and look at it from your opponent's view, so that you recognize, everybody operates with some kind of logic. It may not be our logic, and there might be faulty logic in there, and there might be things like ad hominems and red herrings and things like that people throw in, which are intended as distractions and are often effective, unfortunately. But, part of the value is being able to look backwards and to look at somebody else's view and see what's going on. And then you can have a more respectful conversation.
And it could be as simple as, and I'm going to be a little bit gender mistyping here from the old days, but it could be as simple as your wife's going to have dinner on the table at 7 o'clock, and you find you're not going to be home until 8, and you just expect that, the dinner is going to be warmed up and there for you, and it's your expectation and there's no appreciation for it. Well, maybe if you put yourself in the other position and perceived what it was like to do all the work and, not have you there, at the right time to enjoy it, maybe it might be a little bit different in terms of you getting home on time.
It depends on what you've been doing.
Or at least how you act or what you say when you know you're going to be late. I mean, just putting yourself in the other position no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So I will flip to a place you might not expect, but Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Effective People: seek to understand, then to be understood. Right? It's one of the things that he said. Always seek to understand, then to be understood. In other words, listen first before you jump in and say your position, which I think is a key part of respect to me, which is, it's that same kind of thing as Bill driving me, where he clearly did not want to go up to Vero. And I don't blame him. It's a long trek. It's a healthy hike from our house. And that I choose to do it in order to teach the class is my choice, not his. And so, it was something he should have done as my partner and as my love. And yet, right, it's not something that I should begin to take for granted. And I need to recognize, what his contribution is to things. And so those are some of the points of ethics and values, right? How do you learn to treasure each day, right? Because this is the day that God has made. Right? It says that in the Psalms, right? Today is a beautiful day. It's the day that God has made. How can we stop and look at the values and respect people? God doesn't make junk. What an insult to tell God that God doesn't do a good job at making people. You want to talk about really taking a left turn on it. In fact, that might be a subject to talk about next week. What kind of people does God make? And what is the role of free choice? And, what is evil? Ooh, some really good questions. So maybe you want to join us for a Taste of Judaism. It's this Wednesday night at 7:30, and it's free. We do ask that you register just so we know you're coming. You're welcome to come if you don't register, but it's easier on us if you do. And again, on Sunday at 1:30, both at 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102.
With yummy delights.
That's right. And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb. It's been a great pleasure speaking with you today for Ask a Rabbi.